actually give a presentation in Belfast in person. So I appreciate Belfast is not maybe the most convenient to get to for a lot of people in the PWI. So we said, I said I'd come back and give a lunch and learn presentation on Belfast Grand Central Station and a journey, and maybe some aspects that maybe you won't necessarily be aware of or think of. Because it was a long journey, as you'll see from the presentation. With that, I'll kick it off. And Nick, if you can just say when it's sharing, just go into full screen.
I'll do that. Yeah, it's just about to come up now. There we go. You're live, but you haven't gone into full screen mode just yet. There you go. That's it.
Perfect. So the history is kind of important for the station because maybe not people are aware, but like it's quite a historic site. It was probably known as Belfast Station back in the day, before it became Great Victoria Street. It opened originally in 1839, and then continued to be Belfast Station to 1848. And then in 1852, it became Great Victoria Street, which is probably what everybody kind of knew the name there before we closed it, became Belfast Grand Central Station in 2024. So there's a long history of this site, and that's quite important because of how it was used in the past as well, and especially as we talk through the enabling works as well. So in the mid-1990s, you'll see the site was vacated, and you can see there kind of the old tracks coming in. The sheds in the background is the site where Belfast Grand Central Station is located. So there's bus washes, bus engineering facilities, contaminated land from old turning diesel engines as well. There was the old turning circles was located on the site and buried back in the day as well. So a lot of reuse has gone through the site. One of the advantages was we still own the site, quite a prominent number of hectares in the centre of Belfast, which was a big advantage to Translink. So you should be seeing now GBS, I knew it. Apologies, a bit of a lag there when I'm putting hit the next share.
Yeah, can you see it okay now?
Yeah. You see it now? Perfect. So Mervyn, he kind of talked to us in October, and he's the head of rail, I should point out, for Translink. You can see there, not the most prettiest of track layout, quite contentious, jointed, busy, full of services, and no slack. And that's the problem. It was in decline. If the system went down, it was critical to Translink. It is a terminus station, Great Victoria Street, but it was it primarily serviced everything out to Lisburn, out that direction, Portadown, and then also, it just had a really tight radius into the station as well, which was not great when your S&C is sitting on a curve. So there's a lot of problems around Great Victoria Street. And then when you get into the station, I don't know, I used to describe it like a little bit like a hamster tunnel. You couldn't clearly see where bus and rail was. You kind of went down kind of corridor kind of layout. Not really this nice open integrated space that what we have now at Belfast Grand Central Station. So from an operations point of view, quite problematic to run and maintain. So looking forward, we knew we had the problems. The discussion started back in 2012, so quite a long time ago. Preliminary trying to get the vision. How do we transform Belfast? We knew the aging assets. We knew the problems. There was the troubles in the Northern Ireland too. Things were in decline from an infrastructure point of view. And there was this growth in the economy as well, and tourism was on the increase. So it's how do we make it more of a transform the area, really, transformation project that everyone can use. And it isn't just a station. They wanted it really to be this conceptual hub idea as well. So 2012 was basically when the heads got in the room and said, right, what does it look like and what's the feel and what we want to get out of it. And plans emerged, and I don't know if anybody knows and seen the photos of Belfast Grand Central Station. It's pretty damn close to what was constructed. So that kind of great thinking and vision back in the early days was spot on, you know, and we had a very constrained site. We did own the site, like I pointed out earlier, which was a big advantage. We had bus facilities in it, but and we knew there at the bottom of the left screen, you can see in the image, it's quite a tight throat. And that takes you down into the Blythefield curve, which is your up and down Dublin, your central reversible, and your Blythefield up and down too. That will take you on around in a tight curve over to Mannion, City Botanic, and then continues on up to Coleraine and out to Bangor direction. So they knew the lay of the land, they knew the constraints, the space, they knew kind of the vision, what they wanted from the station. We knew the capacity had to increase. So you'll see there, we would have gone from 4 platforms in Great Victoria Street up to 8 in Belfast Central. So in 2016, in November, the public consultation kicked off for what this new station would look like in Belfast. And a lot of discussions and optioneering was taking place.
Oh, you okay there? There you go.
It's still showing 2016.
2016, you're up, and that's the slide that's up there now.
Hitting next to Nick, but
Are we waiting for the next slide, Lisa?
Yes, and I'm hitting next slide and
give it a second to come through. Yeah.
Go. Do you see 2012 to 2016? There we go. Apologies, seems to be a bit of a lag at lunchtime. So it started off with KPMG in 2020. So the concern was like 51% of projects were likely intend to reach their goals. So that's quite a significant issue that we're kind of aware of for infrastructure projects in this scale. Also, kind of the biggest mistake is never assume. We know that from a project management point of view. And one of the biggest mistakes is to let your end users or operationals colleagues to allow them to assume. So I think the key point was making sure your requirements are locked down. What do you want and what is the need and how we need it and where can we flex. So basically getting the mandatory requirements locked down is a key point and the early doors of this project and in any project in fairness. So there's golden rules set by the Permanent Way team. They really wanted to live by this set of rules from the optioneering point of view. They didn't want to be maintaining something continuously in the future. They wanted something really that looked after itself for quite an extensive period of time. So there were quite limitations put on the project, and rightly so. One of the big ones is where the trains can go. So there's huge timetable changing for this new station. One of the key things you'll see is the Enterprise was moved from Mannion to Belfast Station on an hourly basis. So a massive ramp up in timetabling as well was known at that point in time. Also, with Great Victoria Street, the curves going in, very problematic, as we kind of pointed out from a maintenance point of view. So this rule was set that if you think we want straight platforms, as straight as you can get them, those 8 platforms, we don't want anything on a curve. There were set rules around the plane line with a minimum radii of 200 meters. We want a standard S&C type. We don't want anything that's very bespoke, very difficult to basically get in the future, off the shelf kind of approach. And it was pretty clear things like spares and, you know, having things readily available in the future, just thinking again to the future, what do you want basically to look after itself was kind of the golden rule. And I think Mervyn kind of touched in October, like we kind of have to manage because it was a hub. It's a lot of conflicting and different requirements coming together. These were the set rules from a Permanent Way point of view, but we had to be able to flex and move as well. But there was quite set rules in place during the optioneering stage. So there was 42 different options, but 17 didn't meet the rule. So therefore the PWI team was like, well, that's only 25 different options we have on the table. And then at that point, it was what's best fit what actually works out of those 25 options, because they met the hard and fast rules set by the PWI, like the straight platform, like the radii. And that golden rule thread solves the whole way through the construction phase, especially from scope. You know, it's very easy, people say value engineering or add this into new scope, but by setting the vision and a clear kind of almost like a barrier around it from the very beginning, it meant we were able to focus on time, delivery, and just create no noise around the construction team. Very clear what the vision and the outlook should be from the beginning. So we'll just go on to the next bit. So this is where I took over, and kind of was in October, took the through the delivery phase. So as you can see on the right hand side of the screen, you'll see like the BBC. At the top, you'll see the SS Arena, and that's where the River Lagan flows through Belfast. You've got the new Ulster University over at Yorkgate, so that area has been gone through massive regeneration in the last decade. And you'll see the big green blob in the bottom of the screen is Weaver's Cross. So I should point out Belfast Grand Central Station is a tiny cog in what they want for this regeneration in this area. And the whole wide regeneration area, or the new area, will be known as Weaver's Cross. So the station is only both part one. So it sits very much in the heart and the core as a flagship station, but around it there will be mixed retail use. The old Great Victoria Street will be redeveloped. And then they're looking at, like, you know, maybe no such thing as dead space anywhere. Land is such a valuable commodity. So looking at, like, even the strip along between the West Link and the back of the station, could that be reused as valuable mixed housing or student housing, or what could that be used as well for? Because, as I said, land is become such a pricey commodity in city centre, so it's so important that, you know, you make the land work. And also it's kind of a good visual. You'll see it's kind of that shape where you've got the tight constraint at the bottom right, linking out to the Brightfield. You've got the West Link tight up against it, and you're really surrounded by Grosvenor Road and roads. You only can work within that footprint. There is no flexibility with space. The top of the screen, you'll see Weaver's Cross. It's very close to Royal Victoria Hospital, and Belfast City Hall, and George's Market, the waterfront. Again, over the right, you'll see the University of Ulster there at Yorkgate, what I was chatting about, its mass regeneration too. Idea, 15-minute city. You'll hear about this. The 15-minute city is basically having everything within a walking 15-minute radius of your centre. It makes the city much more compact, much more livable, and just, again, encourages green forms of transport, like in the city centre, like cycling and pedestrian walking. So it's quite important as we move towards that climate focus as well. So the ambition was always a transport-led regeneration project. It wasn't simply, you know, we need to reconfigure the railway tracks to make it work better. There was a much bigger vision in TransLink. And also it was to support the growth we could see in Northern Ireland as well. And there was a huge amount of tourism. You'll see by the number of hotels. I don't know if anybody's been in Belfast last decade. It feels like there's a new hotel every week. And also a big one is it was between West and East Belfast, the site. So it's connecting local communities, and it's a neighbourhood that had needed a lot of regeneration and needed that boost basically in the area. It kind of had been a little bit forgotten. So again, that's what the flagship project was trying to achieve as well, is bringing jobs, bringing a bit more, just bringing the whole area into like another new kind of suburb of Belfast to make it work better for what it was. So the track and signalling scope of works. So kind of given the context of where the site is. So you can see quite constrained site. City centre is never easy. Space is a big thing. You'll see through the thread, through the presentation. But also over to the right, you'll see there's Langan. So that was where the enterprise service that ran from Belfast to Dublin. That has now moved over into Belfast Grand Central Station. So that's where we knew the timetabling was going to ramp up as well. Belfast Grand Central Station is a hub terminal station where Langan's place station is a through station. So it's a through station it takes you connectivity all into the northern part of Northern Ireland, up to Coleraine and on further on up the coast. and also out to Bangor past the airport that direction. But the red line, the whole way down to Dunmurray, and you can see on the screen, it's the scale of the signalling and telecoms. And Andy will be taking you through that in part 2 on the 13th of May. So the scale of signalling is quite substantial on this project. Again, old infrastructure, old assets that need to be renewed. The Blythefield curve is just a few kilometres of track relay, but quite contentious, as you'll see through the presentations, a few kilometres of plain line renewal that needed to be done. Very tight site, tight curves, but again, trying to make the best, as those golden rules that we touched in the beginning, work hard for what we need for the space. So there you can see the station. It's a nice aerial shot. You'll see on the front there at the glazing is the 26 bus stands, and behind is the 8 platforms. Over behind as well, we touched on the enabling works review of the works, is also where we moved and decanted bus operations. And that's the one thing we have to be mindful on this night. Bus operations had to be kept operational the whole way through the project, through the site at all times, apart from a couple of mini blockades, like say over the weekend, where we had to basically construct out half a roundabout. But primarily we had to keep buses running the whole way through the site, through the whole construction. And that was no means feat, because if you can imagine traffic management plans and everything, as well as doing the delivery of the railway at the same time. And this is kind of important because there's not just, you can't just go into the railway delivery side of things, because it sat side by side with the main works delivery as well for the station. The main works we'll touch on, there was 2 formation designers. So the main works did up to, you'll chat about the brownfield site. So that's basically up to the point of the fence where the light railway corridor was. So the main works was able to deliver the formation and the drainage. So basically the muck shift, as I like to call it, and get it all out and ready for then the railway contractor Babcock to come in and start doing construction of the railway lines. That was done in advance, but it also means it was done in advance of the main blockade too. So taking that pressure off the back of the programme was key the whole way through. So as a programme manager, this job was quite interesting because the phasing of the different contracts and how they had to work together. So things like the contracts team, we use frameworks and we use NEC contracts. Framework is great because it's readily gone through the public procurement process. So we have a railway contractor sitting I suppose on our supply chain that's done the checks and balances already, and then we can utilise them from a delivery point of view much quicker. But they are sitting side by side with the station contractor, and how do you make that interface work? Because as a programme manager, we are going to have very much similar milestones, and everything has to obviously join up. It's like a lovely game of Tetris, let's be honest. So the main works was FSGV, which is Farris Sphere joint venture. And again, working the 2 of them together, using that option C, a pain gain incentivisation, was how we laid out the contracts from the railway and the building, which is known as the main works. Very much in the building, I suppose just to quickly take you through, the enterprise spine was quite new for this area of Belfast, because I said it was the relocation over from Langan over into Belfast Grand Central Station. That's the train that goes from Belfast to Dublin, and increasing the timetable to an hourly service, which was probably every 2 hours before. Pay concourse is basically nothing to get through to the railway side unless you have a ticket. We also had a massive new ticketing project going on in parallel, so new ticket barriers, new systems all being introduced to TransLink. I suppose this is why it is a transformative project, is there was so many newness to TransLink at the same time, and allowing that time from a training point of view was so critical as well, because it all had to work on a date, and using phased and programs was the only way. There's not much point opening and then it's overwhelming for transit staff. So as a program manager, it's trying to phase programs to make it work better, and I'll take you through that a little bit as well in the next slide. Again, this is throughout the project. I've thrown in quite a lot of photos because I appreciate not everybody's based in Northern Ireland may not actually seen it, whereas people who were at the October in person presentation have been through the station and kind of knew the site really well. So it kind of gives you a good looking back. The front there is a 50-metre busway structure. and that is primarily for bus operations. And the rust-coloured bridges, as some people call it. And then you can see the short and long platforms. Long platforms is because we had to facilitate the enterprise train. And they are of like significant length as well. You know, you'll take you through them as well in a later date as well, the presentation. So Transit didn't get here alone. Like I'm trying to convey, like, it's program manager, there were so many interfaces to manage and all different contracts with all different programs, and all had to be lined up at the same date. So it's Fire Steer was the main works, and was joint venture who did the building and also did the formation for the PWI in the brownfield site. TransLink, we were obviously the client, and like people like myself were embedded in the team who sat alongside the contractor. Graham Construction overseeing the enabling works. So that was prior to anybody from a PWI or a main works point of view. There was a lot of contamination land. There was a new pedestrian bridge. There was a culvert that needed realignment. And new bus engineering facilities had to be built as well. So that was when I came on the project in 2020 and overseeing those works as well. Babcock was the S&T designer, and also they construct the S&T. Babcock was the PWI contractor, but was not the PWI designer. That actually was Arab, who was there from the concept design early doors. Byrne Luby was the formation designer on the railway side of the corridor as well. And Arcadis was our contract administrators who oversee the NEC PM contracts on behalf of TransLink. So what are we covering today? It's kind of important. There's so much to talk about in this project, and hence why it's probably been split up into different parts. The enabling works in 2020 was Graham Construction, like I just went through. The Blackstaff River culvert needed diverted, and that was a big thing. It's 360 meters across through the site that was sitting high, which meant we couldn't obviously build the railway tracks because you don't want a little hump in your railway tracks. So we had to lower that whole culvert the whole way through the site. NIROC was interesting. So NIROC came in as a little bit of a curveball. I know that I'm joking. But it wasn't part of the early doors conversation way back in the PWI discussion. But we used an old NX panel, and we still do use an old NX panel in part. But parts are getting difficult. It's very old technology. And we want to move to the Northern Ireland Railway Operating Centre. So that'd be the same as your York Rock, but on a very miniature scale. And basically taking different phases of Belfast Central in onto a dynamic route setting, DRS system. And that's fit for today, and readily available parts, easier to maintain. So NIROC actually came along with as a key milestone as well, and it had the same program dates as the S&T and PWI. So as a program manager, that was a big group, 5, 6 to 8. I had to oversee as well, phase of a project, and that was undertaken by Babcock. So it was the same supplier, which was good. And Permway I touched on was Arab. So they were the designers early doors. Basically, if you're going to talk about those golden rules that Mervyn was basically making sure worked, that was key. It was very much making sure like we were listening to the client and making sure like it worked, like the straight platforms and SFC not on curves, for example. Enabling works is again like there was a pedestrian bridge that needed 308A installed, and this is because when we moved from 4 to 8 platforms, we had to create a new line coming into the station. So we had to expand that bridge, basically lengthen that bridge to basically cover a new line of track. But also we needed to talk about the regeneration and carbonisation in the future. If we move to electrification, the height of that bridge was also allowed for that clearance if we do that work in the future as well. Signalling and telecoms, was designed by Babcock, and they also was the construction of the signalling telecoms. And the formation was Byrne Luby, and was the formation design, but it also threw a curveball because we're in Belfast Sleech. For any of you who know, Belfast Sleech under wet conditions is more or less like soup. That's how I describe it. Basically, it doesn't have a great stiffness. And therefore we had to do a ground improvement layer, like a slab track but buried, because we don't have any slab track in NI or Northern Ireland Railway. And so we want to continue the same ballast makeup for the maintenance in the future. So I'm just going to show you some pictures because a lot of people don't even see this, know this, understand this, that's passing through the site. So in the site there you see the dashed red, there is two rivers, Poundburn and the Blackstaff, that crosses under the site and meets out the front of the station and then continues flows towards the River Lagan to the right of the screen. The site, as I said before, was always owned by TransLink. However, we allowed a diversion of a culvert to come through the site, but it was built high. That meant you couldn't get your traditional makeup off your P-way, and therefore that whole culvert needed to be lowered. The length was 360 metres. We needed transition slabs, obviously, because of imposed straight loading, and we didn't want, soft and hard spots to be created. It's a 600 mil reinforced concrete section, and it's 7 by 2 meters, where you're in the internal dimensions. And for the P-way section, that's the P-way section, and the thinking is there, it's obviously shallower in depth, so basically pushing the culvert down to get the tracks over, and then it's largely 5 meters by 2.5 meters for the remainder of the diversion. So you can see the clear kind of cross section, and I think the photos speak of 1,000 words. There's the transition details going across the track of the Blackstaff River culvert. And this is basically at the throat of the site, referred to throat of the site, so that's that narrow pinch point you see at the bottom. And there you can see the scale. Because we're in Belfast Leach, significant sheet piling required. It is cast in situ box throughout the site. In the background, you'll see Durham Street. To the front of the screen, you would actually be in the main building at the moment, just to the right of it. And to the right, where you see the existing tracks going into Great Victoria Street that are no longer there, that is now the bus stand area. So there you can see the scale of Blackstaff Culvert, and this for any PWI works commence. This is your ground works that need to be done in advance. And it just shows you the scale of engineering work and enabling works prior to any PWI works had to be undertaken. And always the BT building is still there in the corner, so it's always a good kind of landmark to orientate yourself against that big white building. And then just you can see just more photos going through the Blackstaff culvert. Also, 308A, that's the bridge was rented that we need to span a new line of track going into the new station. Again, not so simple. Like, we want to retain the earthwork on the left-hand side because it was quite tight. So there was 8 number soil anchors, approximately 70 meters long, and provision of 8 number mini pads support the new east bank set over on the right-hand side. The other thing we have to remember was also this was installed in 2021. And 2021 to 2024 is a long period of time. So then we had to consider signal sighting distance. So make sure the soil anchors didn't impose any sighting distance issues as well on the existing signalling system that was in place to take you around into Great Victoria Street. And again, there's a lot of construction photos. You can see there's the installation of the bridge deck. It's just a pedestrian bridge deck, but it's quite important from a connectivity point of view because maybe infrastructure wasn't so kind in this area. Like the West Link kind of really cuts through the city. And again, it's that connectivity and making sure you can flow freely from one place to another without just having to stop when you hit obviously the railway tracks. So it's, again, that's a big thing for community, is allow that connectivity so that community on the right can get easy access into the city centre and further on their journey as well. So there's a huge amount of community work in this area because to the right left photo there is housings, and this is known as the BMX Park. So this is actually Belfast City Council land that we actually leased for the duration of the project to help aid delivery. But again, there was a lot of sensitivity around noise in this area as well, working so closely to our neighbours. And there's just the structural drawing, just showing the span of the deck. And the concrete slab was a bit of a curveball, concrete slab or ground improvement layer, whatever you want to call it. And it was 150 meters, So there was quite a lot of ground investigation done within the station area, the land we knew, which is, when you think about it, it's fine, because you have easy access. But some of the ground investigation out on railway corridor, I would say, was a bit patchy. Maybe a lesson learned for the next big project is do more detailed ground investigation on the railway corridor. So we went out and we done investigation of the project, and we realised there was a bit of an issue with settlement in an area where we wouldn't be able to meet the PWI's requirements. Basically, you'd be following up with a lot more regular tandem. And we were like, how do we fix this? So we looked at mini piles, we looked at all different kind of options and what we could do. And the only thing that could meet the stiffness was actually a concrete slab of 150 metres. But as I pointed out earlier, we don't have any concrete slab on NIR. And to keep the same maintenance requirements, we then pushed to basically have a float slab under the makeup of the bottom ballast. So you continue with the same maintenance regime as we have in NIR, which is really important. There you can see also just where it's sat, and then it kind of gets into there's a lot of me as a program manager job in discussions with operations. Revenue versus construction, like it's a massive debate with any project, how long you can get to line close in order to carry out your works, and how much they'll squeeze the float in order to basically keep the revenue higher. So there's a lot of that discussion going on. One of the advantages was, you'll see there where the slab is the solid red block. It's sat within outside the existing railway corridor, so you can see the railway corridor kind of sweeps around to the right hand side. You'll see it there in the bottom right, where the railway lines are, and then you can see where the new lines are sitting in the centre of the photo. But the solid block red will show you that part of that was sitting over the existing lines, so you can't do it in fancy blockade. So we had to go for a Christmas blockade, an Easter blockade, and summer blockade in order to do the works. Our summer blockade was a lot shorter, but unfortunately we had to, cure a concrete slab in the middle or at the front of that summer blockade. So it meant it extended out into May. We couldn't move the back date because that's when the driver training and everything was set up from an operational goal point of view. It also meant all the programs were lined up on that same milestone of the 12th of August. So the front end of the program had to come forward to allow that curing and pouring time and get this concrete slab in that was under the existing railway corridor. But prior to that, we did utilise the Christmas, and we did utilise basically not using the rules of the railway, basically because it was in the brownfield site, it was built on the civil side of the site. And we could do that well in advance of our main blockades. So there you can see kind of a nice clear indication of where we're hitting the contentious problems. As a program manager, everything in green, we said we could complete by Easter in the programs that works. And again, that's by using blockades at Christmas, and then also using the brownfield site, basically building behind the fence. And then the summer blockade, that bit in red, is where we had to add on weeks into our blockade. So then it became a 13-week blockade in summer 2024, which is quite an extensive blockade and nothing like we've ever delivered in Northern Ireland. So signalling and telecoms a permanent way. So we kind of showed this kind of image earlier. We can see clearly the extent of signalling that goes all the way down to Dunmurry. And the little triangle you see at the top is the Blightfield curve, which is where the plain line PWI works primarily took place. And it went as far as City Hospital, which is just there. You'll see just in one of the wee red markers for the train, just below the Navy Circle. So signalling and telecoms, like I said, will be touched a lot by the part 2 of the presentation, which is on the 13th of May. But on the screen, you can see this is the first service coming in from the enterprise, which is quite a monumental moment. Getting the railway commissioned and opened. So we can take you through now more the delivery of what that was in Easter and summer. Easter was a good test curve for us there, for testing kind of us whether our plans work. There was so much DWWP, so that's doing works within possession planning. And that's looking at your test plans, and that's where you work really along with your CEMs and your CREs, so your construction engineer managers and your construction registered engineers. I think one of the beauty, we all were located in the one office, and sometimes I felt more contractor than Translink. It felt like we did put up a protective barrier, and it felt like we got the team right. There was no problem we could not solve within that team. We had a very open culture and honest with each other, which worked really well from a delivery point of view. I think setting that golden rules from the very beginning, not bringing in late scope changes or anything that could cause noise, distraction from what we had in hand to deliver. Because let's be honest, this is one of the biggest railway delivery projects we probably ever will see in Northern Ireland. And there's things like simple things program management, like resources and the staffing isn't available in Northern Ireland to that scale to deliver this project. So there was a lot of reliance on bringing guys in from Scotland, England, flying them in, flying them out. But with that as a program manager, I had to realise there you have to have a bit of redundancy afloat. Flights get cancelled, ferries, rough seas, and therefore you had to bring in a lot of management of expectations as well within the Translink, in order to deliver this and hit that milestone of the 12th of August to start the driver training, that we cannot be running 100 miles an hour, like as loads of us on this call will know that, railroad blockades are usually short, quite intense, working 24/7, and it is brutal, let's be honest, usually for a week, 2 weeks, not 13 weeks. I did not want a burnout team, and neither did Babcock want a burnout team. So we really had to think hard and protect a little bit of float in that 13 weeks. So we could always just maintain a nice momentum. And this is my point, is Easter was a good try run. It was kind of to understand that the team worked well together. What didn't work, storage was a massive issue on this project. Like, where do you actually put materials? And I had many construction resident engineer getting quite aggravated with me because things that maybe senior managers envision going, oh, there's land there. And I'm like, yeah, but you made a commitment that it will only be used at certain times. That doesn't work in a 24-hour railway delivery point of view. So my job was usually always finding more land. Where can we store, build new wraps, get that change cleared in order to allow the construction to progress at the speed it needs to progress. Our motto was always boring is good during the railway blockade, because we felt like we kept the hour by hour programme. We had a great team that we all just sat together and constantly had each other's back. And listen, that's a big one. Listen, and then rally together to find solutions quick. And there was things 100%, there's things probably I don't even fully know, but there's things we managed and strategic planned out that would be done post commissioning. So things like the old S&T, for example, was in a very narrow corridor width, and that's where the drainage had to go in. So we said, right, if we overpump to this point, and then in T3's follow-up, we will get the drainage running once it's decommissioned, and basically that S&T becomes dead because it was too dangerous from a safety point of view to do within the blockade. I think once everybody put the problems on the page and had a mitigated solution and a remediation strategy of how to go forward, everything works really well as a team. So Easter was really flushing out. It's quite small. You're probably look from a lot of what we're used to. It was 150 meters on the up and down 25 meters in the down, and we installed 1.778 points. It got smaller and smaller as well. This is the other thing working with operations, because our possession limits started getting shorter. Just because again they were kind of like, oh well, they're in revenue mode. They're in a keep the services running. And also from a signaling point of view, we're putting quite really heavy restrictions on it. So it was a good testing ground, Easter 24. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that basically we had to sort the teething problems early on this job, so that when we got to the main blockade in the summer, we had a clear run the whole way through. So that just shows you kind of the scale. You'll see kind of that scheme plan of just the up and down Blythefields, up and down Dublins, and then you'll see the up and down Central, which actually is a single line now. But as you see through the little schematics, you'll see how the delivery is done. So Easter, small scale, you'll see there 530 sleepers, one set of points went in, but again, it was really a good test run to make sure summer was going to work. And there's a few photos, just the up and down Dublin, and the 778 points going in. So it kind of covered a lot of what's on this slide. Like the summer and Easter was our primary blockades. There was a lot of wheels free needed as well from the signalling point of view. And that's quite hard because we're sitting out as a project and we didn't use in-house resources. A lot of it, they said at the time, back in the day, there wasn't capacity. So a lot of my job as a program manager is making sure the weekly operating notices are updated, the planners are updated. You know, in NIR, people are aware of when the wheels free well in advance. Business continues as normal in the rest, as we all know, like in Network Rail, for example. So, you know, if you're going to plan in culvert works or if you need to go out on the line and do works, avoid those wheels free period. And so as much communication we get as early doors to try and get the rest of the business lined up with us, because that curveball, like if they had messed up a wheels free in the summer, that threw our whole program into a bit of an array. And you know, it's all about communication and being open and making sure there is a process set up there and the business that works. And I think the other thing is keep it simple as well from a communication and process point of view, because sometimes there's too much red tape and it gets too confusing and it gets lost. Whereas we kept it very lean, very clear and very concise, and used all the protocols in our favour. There was concrete sleepers used throughout. We had actually the timber sleepers into Great Victoria Street. They were battered. So concrete sleepers was the way forward. We also had, you know, the usual minimum sleeper spacings and lateral resistant plates as well for continuous welded rail. And then you just kind of see some of the radii considerations. And then this again is track drainage used throughout. So the same as the filter drain with the blue lid you see throughout Network Rail. We did adhere to the Network Rail standard with the return periods. Again, fully stressed track. And also like the HP 350 high tensile premium rail being used. So again, we do not want to touch this railway or for quite a significant amount of time. So making it work for the future users as well as we could. I'm going to give a little bit of overview on NIR Phase 1A because this is quite important, because this was also a Northern Ireland Railway Operating Centre that had to basically come in the same milestone. So there's 3 separate signal controls, namely Belfast Central, Portadown and Coleraine. And thinking is to bring in all Belfast Central in under one control centre in Langan Place. This is not on the new station, it's over on the other east side of Belfast in another railway operating centre. But it had the same milestone, and that's the key thing. The signalling telecoms relied on the NIRC design as well. So the 2 designs had to be compatible. So therefore it had to have the same milestone of the 12th of August. So the programme, it was quite key. Like I said, it's a much smaller scale of maybe the rock you'd see in York, but it's quite important because the next phases, like we're in group 4 of next phase 1B and 1C now. And so it continues on with the aspiration that we'd have a single operating control centre for all of MNR. But phase 1 is key at the moment. Phase 1A we delivered, and 1B and 1C we're currently in group 4 stage. Here's quite a good schematic as well. It just shows you like CDMs and considerations and interfaces. There's a lot of contracts at play with a lot of programs, and they all had to be lined up to make sure they work. Access and where to store was a big point for Babcock. You know, we had to install a new rack because we had acquired new land. And that again was just the storage facilities were basically not available that they thought that would be available back in, I suppose, 2018, 2019. And then there had to be, as a program manager, try and find alternatives and work again with that team to make sure it worked for all. The blockade in part 1, so it's kind of very much quite clever, I suppose, the phase of the programs, I would say. The thinking was, for example, like as much as we could do, you know, as early doors as possible. Again, working in the brownfield site. So this is everything in the red you see off to the right hand side of the screen. That was all built well in advance of the summer blockade. So basically you're building everything right up to the railway fence and then basically maximizing the time you've got then in the summer blockade and Easter as well as the tester. You can see some kind of photos there, like the straight platform has been key, the installation. There's nothing new or innovative. It was basically keep it simple. I suppose the key. A lot of complex kind of interfaces, but from a railway point of view, like adhere to your drainage standards. Again, there's another meeting coming up about the importance of water management and making sure, the type of rail and the concrete sleepers, the quality, making sure you do those checks so that you do get the right design life out of your assets. And then I've just thrown in a few now at the end of the presentation, a few delivery photos as well, and a few more phase and sequencing that you'll see in the photos too. So in this, you'll see start of May is removal of the old layout. So once we got the 11th and 17th of May was basically strip out. It was 100 miles an hour on site. And this is where a really intense period, stripping it all out. It wasn't just only important for Babcock, it was also important for the main works contractor because they wanted to get into the old Great Victoria Street where the tracks were, because that was becoming their bus yard. So there was a huge pressure on site from the 11th to 17th May to start stripping out. And then again, just shows schematic of kind of just the different CDMs and different areas where we're working. And there's a photo of on the left hand side, which shows just there the day before May before we start stripping out. And then this is literally 12 hours later into Great Victoria Street and start ripping the whole thing out so we can utilize that land. And that's quite important because I said it was also a lay down area for Babcock from a ballast point of view too. So it was just everything kind of depended on the back, as you imagine, of each program plate being delivered. We also had enabling wheels free from a signal point of view, as you can imagine. So 11 hours of the blockade was wheels free. And that's where I'm saying, like, as program manager, it's so important going into the rest of the business. Because, they had to be protected, the wheels free periods. And there was a few of them throughout the whole project. But again, this is all discussed as part of DWWPs and as part of the weekly operating notes and going into the planner to make sure everything is communicated well in advance. There's just another little part one of the blockade. So the part one and part two, so I should explain in the summer. Part one, everything is still running to line. So it comes from Ireland, from Portadown and into Langan. So we are busily working at the Great Victoria Street. So Great Victoria Street is closed now at this point from the 11th of May. And that's where we're focused on. But we are still getting railway services into Belfast to Langan Station till the 6th of July, which is kind of an important date. And there you can see what we've done in that part one. So everything in yellow is what we delivered in part one. So up, down Blythefield, part of your down Dublin, up Dublin, and then you're straight into where you met the work. So everything in red already built. That's the brownfield site. That's what you got delivered up to the fence. Long in advance you got to summer. And everything in black on the left hand side, it was open, and that's where part two will come in from the delivery point of view. But it was quite important as well. Things like this program we had to consider, like the university, Queen's University is Botanic Station. Trying to make sure they're protected from exam time, simple things like that's program. So that's where we really thought out how do we sweat the weeks in summer and make it work. And then we also knew if we tip into September, then you're into kind of more ramping back up again. So you have kind of that key summer period. We knew from a revenue point of view, it's not our peak. And that's your ideal opportunity from a construction delivery point of view. There's some photos looking through from the 11th to the 18th of May, you'll see as well. So you can see like the concrete poured slab in the bottom right, and then getting your up and down Dublin, basically getting your bath slate. Again, then week 2 from the 18th to 25th, then you see like that area we couldn't get into from the concrete slabs. The middle picture just shows the amount of reinforcement that had gone into the concrete slab. And again, working in the up and down Blythefields, and again, looking back at 308 day. In a wee bit of signal and telecoms, the platform made the testing ongoing. That's the other thing I would say, like we've had 2 PSBs and so one PSB for NIROC and one PSB for, so principal supply point, sorry, for BTH. And we also had a relay room. Babcock were brilliant to the point where they had set up test desks in the relay room. So they had done an awful lot of the testers on the relays prior to getting to the commissioning point of view too. So a lot of forward thinking to make sure that one hard date of the 12th of August was hit. Again, that's looking back towards the station. So the station's just beyond there, that bridges. Moves then down into 10 miles an hour through the platforms. Many switches and crossings you'll see on the project. A few more photos just of the delivery phase of part 1 in summer blockade. And then we move into part 2. So part 2 is from the 6th of July. The big change here is, and point to note, is we have now shut Langham Place. So there is no services going into Belfast. So this is when we're at the peak of disruption, I suppose, from a public perception point of view. So a lot of more bus substitutions is required. But again, you need 12 hours of ambulance wheel free. Again, a lot of coordination with the rest of the business. There's no movement. GDS interlocking and GDS signaling. Langham is only open from the north. So Langham would only operate up to Coleraine and onto the north coast and then out to Bangor. But there was no services moving south from this point forward. So everything in red has been delivered up to this point, and then everything in yellow and green is what we delivered in part 2. So the things that you couldn't deliver in part 1 because services run around into Langham Station. And again, just kind of shows like the limits of the part 2 and the train movements and a little bit about it, but you can read a bit further when it's shared online. Again, photos, nothing really again, I suppose, different to point out. I suppose it's just the normal dig, and then bottom, top ballast, obviously filter drain systems used, quite a number of UTX crossings and quite a number of switching crossings to go in. There's 2 gantries to go in as well. Signal gantries, quite significant, that required piling, and that was quite good working closely with the mainworks contractor because for those 16 piles, the mainworks had piling rigs on site too because they had over 2,000 piles or just under 2,000 piles for the formation of the new station as well. So it's quite good to have a little incentivization between the 2 contracts. Just a few more photos there. Go back to our city hospital, quite narrow, quite contained and constrained. Bottom left is quite interesting curveball. So BS 9992 was a new British standard on escape on platforms. You need 2 escape routes. So there's like an emergency walkway at the bottom of the platforms, and again, a little bit of design had to be I know we always say don't introduce new scope, but that had to be from a standard compliance point of view, had to be introduced. And that's just showing again for City Hospital, that's your tie-in point. So again, you're quite constrained within the space you'll see is quite tight. And the photo on the right is looking back to the up and down Byfield, so that would take you around into the new station. I used to read these. I don't think that just kind of takes you through the different stages of the blockade and the final week from the 5th to the 12th. Which is full wheels free commissioning, and the big thing was on the 12th of August was the handover to the driver training, and that milestone was achieved on this project. Again, huge amount of signalling commissioning, but again, Andy Finn's presentation on the 13th of May will take you through this in a lot more detail in this presentation too. And there you can see is the completed layout. The no more Great Victoria Street into Belfast Grand Central Station. It is a terminus station, and then on the left you'll see the first train coming in. Obviously, just your checks and structural gauging, they must be completed prior to the commencement of the driver training. So there's 50 kilometers of cabling, there's 2,500 sleepers, 1,400 relays, 12,500 tons of ballast. So it was a significant project to be seen, not just in NIR, but also in the whole of the United Kingdom. And I think as an integrated station, it works really well. And feedback has been really positive to date. And that is very much a whistle top tour of kind of taking you through from that initial conceptions to the golden rules, to the enabling works, to then taking through the different phases of the delivery and basis program, thinking about brownfield site up to the fence, what can get delivered well in advance you get into your Easter and summer blockade, and then the importance of good, open, and honest communication, and again, working very closely with your team and your contractor to make sure you have the same vision to deliver. I will stop there, Nick.
Thank you. Thank you ever so much. That's very kind of you to give that presentation. It is a fascinating project, and when you think about the end users, the people, the connectivity with buses, the kind of ambience, all of that sort of good stuff, it's a remarkable project. So thank you for sharing your journey so far.
Thank you for listening.
That's all right. Some questions. I recognise it looks like somebody, is it Daniel, has helpfully been answering as we go. So there was a talk, a mention rather, a question about clearances for future electrification. I think the answer there is that where you can, with new structures, you've obviously accommodated those clearances. So that's, I think, is that right, Lisa?
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. And then also Michael's picked up there with a question about Network Rail standards being mentioned, and Brexit and Northern Ireland and all sorts of other kind of paraphernalia going on. And Daniel's already come in again about TSI track compliances and Ricardo Rail. Is there anything more to say about in terms of TSI and interoperability, anything like that?
Yeah, you can probably do a whole presentation on it, to be honest.
I'm
so
sure
the project was deemed as significant, and yes, it was quite a challenging web to basically go through, because we were the first project also as well to kind of go through this. So there was a lot of discussions with our Department for Infrastructure as well. So we had to be TSI compliant, but also, as pointed out, there is some exceptions, like our track gauge is different to, it has to be compliant with Irish Rail. And yeah, there was a lot of debates and discussions on how to take forward. And yes, Ricardo Rail was actually appointed on this project as well, overseeing that for us.
Thank you for that. Just one final one while we've got literally half a minute. Paul has raised a question there. You mentioned golden rules and sticking to scope and requirements. Did you have pressure to change scope and reduce costs?
There's always the pressure as a program manager. How can you squeeze more things, like can you reduce the blockade time in order to save money for BE? One of the beauty is, your signaling has to be that length. You can't cut the wire, make it shorter. So it'll always be looking at going, can you deliver faster? Can you deliver more efficient? Can you basically squeeze your program dates to save money? 100%. Because there was always debate between that whole revenue versus construction timeframes. But I think what we did was, this was a year of delivery. We had 13 weeks. We didn't have the resources readily available. We had to bring in a lot of resources. And we did a lot of roster planning, even looking at the health and well-being of the people, and how actually it would work from a delivery point of view, from a client and a contractor point of view. So yeah, huge amount of forward planning. Even simple things like on-site catering, like give a Sunday roast on a Sunday if they're out working. Just
keep your people on site.
Yes, like look after your people on site. Especially in the beginning of the part 1 and part 2, when you have the big muck shift, basically that intensity to get everything stripped out is insane. Everybody knows that on a PWI blockade. So even just having like bottles of water at the forefront, making sure your water coolers are kept up and easy access, just simple things, sun cream, like just look after the people who are actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
And everybody wants to do a good job. Like that's the thing. Everybody just wants to hit that milestone. So there was a lot of work around that as well in advance, that maybe more than that normally would be put into like a shorter duration blockade.
I think it's the same the world over, isn't it? In terms of having a very good and detailed attention to detail in the planning stage, and you will get what you
Good
expect.
results. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, that's it.
And
Yeah.
like there was things, don't get me wrong, like we had add in a bit of scope, but we're quite conscious. Noise is a big distraction, and there's nothing worse. I always see when you look at teams where there's a technical team and there's a project management team. And if a project management team is it's too remote from the technical team, to me that causes a flurry of issues. To me, we sat very much integrated together. They understood where I was coming, I understood where they were coming. And once you kind of manage each other's expectations, you could very clear what scope could be adopted in the bit of flow you had. Because there's a West Cant in K1 had to be adopted because we couldn't get the maintenance parts. But we worked very much early in the program, so it didn't distract from the later end of the program. So there's a good example of how new scope was a betterment for the project, but it didn't become a distraction to the overall program.
Good stuff. I'm going to wind us up there. So from me and from everybody else and everyone in the PWI wider, thanks ever so much, Lisa. That was fascinating. We look forward to the second stage, as it were. But thank you ever so much on behalf of everyone who's attended the PWI and of course myself. So thank you, Lisa. Lovely.
No worries. Thank you very much for listening. Really
cheers, and cheers, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.